Welcome back. So, today we will discuss about the reproductive cycle, and we will try to understand this reproductive cycle using human beings as well as some lower vertebrates also. So, in reproductive cycle, if we start looking and try to understand this reproductive cycle, there is a series of events happening when we are talking about this reproductive cycle that lasts maybe for a month, or maybe the time scale varies in different species of animal. In case of human being, we have something of 28 or 29 days, while in case of other animal, they have different varies length in terms of time scale. Now, this reproductive cycle is defined by a series of events happening in this period of time, and that is basically regulated by the hormones secreted in the reproductive tract as well as the hormone coming from the central nervous system. So, these are controlled in two ways. This is either controlled by central nervous system or controlled by the hormones present in the female reproductive tract. So, we are talking very specifically about the female hormone, and these hormones are basically progesterone. And in case of the central nervous system, two hormones which we will discuss about is follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, FSH and LH we will discuss in this context. So, let us try to understand what is the difference between a primate and a non-primate animals. One is called primates and the other is called non-human primates. Non-human primates. So, primates in simple language, these two are orders actually. So, primates are order in classification of animal kingdom. The primates are coming as an order, and we are primates. So, Homo sapien, human beings are primate, apes, monkeys, New World and Old World monkeys are coming under primates. So, these species are advanced actually. So, they are advanced order of kingdom Animalia. So, they have a well developed brain, the best type of vision, what we are calling 3D vision we have, and also we have bipedal motion. So, what we are doing is a kind of moving with our five, we have this digits actually, and then we have an opposite thumb in order to support or grasp the ground area. So, basically we have advanced brain, we have advanced vision, and we have advanced motility, movement pattern and all. While those things are little bit less advanced in case of non-human primates. So, this is the basic difference between primates and non-human primates. And now, we have to understand that non-human primates are all animals what we have in our surrounding, like dog, cats, cow, buffaloes, horses, pigs and all. So, these are the animals which are surrounding in our neighborhood, and these are all non-human primates, while monkey, apes and human beings are advanced version of the Animalia kingdom, and they are coming under the order primates. Now, in reproductive biology, there is a series of events, and that series of events is orchestrated by the hormonal regulation in the human body, and we will try to discuss something very similar in case of non-human primates and the primates later on. So, let us start with something in the reproductive cycle that is happening in case of non-human primates. So, we will start looking into this cycle as a very advanced form of reproductive events happening in case of non-human primates. So, let us start with the non-human primates and then we will discuss about our case, and that is primates. So, in non-human primates, we have the cycle called Estrus Cycle. Now, Estrus Cycle is nothing but the event, the reproductive cycle, the reproductive event in case of non-human primates. And if we go and check the slides, we have this Estrus Cycle, and this Estrus Cycle is divided into two distinct parts. One is called polyestrous animals and the other is called monoestrous animal. So, polyestrous, as name itself indicates, poly means more. So, if we have poly means more and mono means only one. So, if a particular animal species have more than one estrus cycle in a reproductive period, we can simply call it polyestrous animal, while if there is only one cycle of reproductive behavior in a particular season, we can simply call it monoestrous animal. Sometimes it is also called as monoestrous animal. O is silent in that case. So, let us go back in the slide and see what are the examples of these animals. So, polyestrous animals are basically cattle, pigs, mice and rats. While in case of monoestrous animal, we have canines species, canines actually, and canines are what we have: dogs, wolves, foxes and bear. So, these are the species of animals which are behaving estrus cycle. So, these are series of events. I am not going to talk much detail about this estrus cycle, but one should know what is estrus cycle, what are the similar kind of structure available in case of human females. And the name is different, by the way. And now, let us try to see that what are the events happening in case of estrus cycle. So, we will go once again in the slide and see that we have the stages of estrus cycle, and these stages are proestrus, means this is before estrus. So, O is silent here. So, remember one thing, we are talking about estrus cycle while the stages are estrus. So, we have proestrus cycle which is before estrus, estrus which is actual estrus period, sometimes it is also called as heat period at the time of actual perception of the male counterpart. Then we have metastrus condition, and then finally, we have diestrus condition. So, if we see the definition wise, we have proestrus condition, this is the first stage of the estrus cycle, immediately before the estrus cycle, and it is actually characterized by both endometrium and ovarian follicles development. So, if we see here that what is happening in proestrus cycle, that is before estrus, the two terminology we have to understand, that what we have discussed is this is the mature follicle, and what we are calling mature follicle as Graafian follicle. So, we have Graafian follicle that is having matured ova, and this follicle is basically rupturing by LH surge phenomena, and what we discuss, LH surge is basically luteinizing hormone is getting upregulated, and because of high level of LH, the ovulation takes place. So, ova is coming out, and then the remaining Graafian follicle is converted into what we call the structure called corpus luteum. Corpus luteum, and this corpus luteum will support the growing fertilized ova that which is called zygote later part by secreting a very specific female hormone called progesterone. So, in nutshell, what we have discussed, that this follicle, the matured follicle, Graafian follicle, is containing ova. Now, this is the one growing phase, that what we discussed, that we have primordial cell, and primordial cell is converted into a mature follicle after going through primary oocyte, secondary oocyte, tertiary oocyte, and then mature oocyte. Actually, we can simply call it follicles actually. So, these are all follicular stages. Now, if you see that these are all developmental stages, right from this follicle to the mature form, the growing follicle to the mature form. So, we can simply call this stage as follicular stage, follicular stage. And after development of follicle, we have this ovulation happened at the time of rupturing of Graafian follicle, and then we have supporting this growing or ruptured ova. Once it is fertilized, we can call it simply as zygote, and this zygote is maintained by the secretion of corpus luteum, and what we are calling is progesterone. So, progesterone is nothing but the secretion of corpus luteum. So, we can simply call it as luteal phase, luteal phase. So, luteal phase is nothing but the phase where corpus luteum is active. That means, it can secrete enzyme that can sustain this zygote, growing zygote. Now, this is the case when zygote is ready. If zygote is not developing, then simply this ova will turn out, and we will have the complete one cycle of estrus. We are talking about non-human primates in case of cattle, in case of pigs and all. Now, the pro-estrus condition is what these follicular stages are kind of developing, the follicular stage are developing. So, once we will understand this one, we need to understand that what is a follicular stage. So, we have this follicular stage. So, Graafian follicle and another thing is actually matured in this particular phase. So, we called it pro-estrus. There is another terminology which is used in the slide, is called endometrium. So, I just thought that I will explain what is follicular phase and how it can be linked with the luteal phase, which we will discuss later part in the fertilization. So, this is follicular phase. So, next is the endometrium, because what we discussed in the first pro-estrus condition, that this pro-estrus is nothing but the development of follicles and endometrium. The structure of the female body, what we discussed in our anatomical structure of the female reproductive system, we discussed about a very important organ, and that is called uterus. The whole area where the growing fetus is kind of sustained for a period of gestation. So, this inner lining of uterus is called endometrium. Endometrium. Endometrium is nothing but the inner lining of the uterus, because this is the lining, these are the area that can sustain the growing fetus inside the mother body. If this whole area is getting developed and all, in order, the whole biology of this whole process is, suppose if there is an ovulation, the ova will come out in the female reproductive tract, and if there is a fertilization, if the sperm is coming into the female reproductive tract, the male and female ova, the female ova and the male gamete will fertilize and will produce a zygote. Now, zygote needs to sustain inside the female reproductive tract, and who will sustain it? So, the whole atmosphere needs to get ready, and that readiness, preparedness is coming by the specific covering of the endometrial layer, and that is why endometrium is very important. The inner lining of the uterus will form a very specific covering in order to sustain the growing fetus. So, let us go to the slide, and once again we will see what is pro-estrus is basically development of both endometrium and the ovarian follicles, which we have already understood. Second is estrus, and this estrus is actually the stage where the male and the female is getting perceptive to the male, and the process is called mating, and very specifically in case of animals we are calling this specific period as heat period, where the females are kind of perceptive to or receptive to male, and the sperms are getting penetrated inside the female reproductive system, and finally the male gamete, which is sperm, is getting fertilized into the ova. So, the next step is metastrus. So, this is the third stage of the estrus cycle and is characterized basically now the mating is over and the sperm and ova get fused and they already formed the zygote. Now, what is the next stage what we discuss is corpus luteum. So, there will be a sexual inactivity. So, there is no sexual behavior in case of animal after estrus stage, and then there will be a formation of corpus luteum, and this corpus luteum will give a secretion to hormone progesterone in the next stage, diestrus. So, diestrus is the last stage of estrus cycle, which is characterized by the functional corpus luteum, which will secrete the high concentration of progesterone inside the female reproductive tract. So, these are the 4 stages, and then the last one is not a stage, but it's an anestrus condition, that is a prolonged period of sexual rest where the reproductive system is quiet. So, basically there is no as such behavior, sexual behavior in case of animals, and this is simply called quiescent phase. And this quiescent phase is nothing but the anestrus condition, where the female reproductive system is just quiet. So, there is absolutely no activity. So, what we discuss is proestrus condition, where the follicle and the endometrial layer is getting prepared. Then we have actual heat period, we call estrus, where the male and the female are getting sexual mating, what we call, and then female gamete ova is getting fertilized by the male gamete, that is sperm, and after this the whole reproductive tract is not doing much of the sexual activity while there is a development of corpus luteum, because this corpus luteum is getting developed. And in diestrus condition, this diestrus condition is nothing but the active phase of corpus luteum, which will secrete eventually the hormone progesterone that can sustain the growing zygote. So, this is all about something which we need to understand, and that is very specific to non-human primates, and what we call this whole stage is as estrus cycle. So, remember, estrus cycle is a very demarcated rhythmic activity of the female reproductive system in case of non-human primates, and we discussed that there are 2 distinct species, one is polyestrus animal and the other is monoestrus animal, where the estrus cycle is many and single respectively. So, we will now move on to the actual cycle in case of primate, and the primate is we human beings. So, let us start and discuss about this very distinct cycle in case of human, and if you go in the slide, we can simply say that these are called menstrual cycle. So, menstrual cycle is the rhythmic reproductive cycle in case of female reproductive tract. Now, we need to understand this menstrual cycle in a great detail. So, let us start menstrual cycle. In puberty, just attaining the puberty is defined by a rhythmic process of a cycling behavior in case of females, and this starting of the menstrual cycle in case of the human female is called menarche. Menarche is nothing but the start of reproductive cycle, and that reproductive cycle what we are discussing called menstrual cycle. So, menstrual cycle is getting a start in human females at the time of after the attaining maturity, and that is called puberty. So, at the puberty, the first menstrual cycle that is encountered by a female is called menarche, and after 50 years of age, the main reproductive cycle is getting ceased actually. So, there is a stoppage of this reproductive behavior in case of female after the age of 50. So, approximately, and this varies by the lifestyle and other things related to the female body actually, and the last one is called menopause. So, menopause is nothing but the stoppage of menstrual cycle. So, if we define the reproductive life of a female, we can simply say that the length between the menarche and the menopause is the actual reproductive age of a female, because this is the starting point of the reproductive cycle and this is the stoppage point. So, this is what we call the reproductive life of a female body. So, after understanding this menarche and menopause, we need to understand what is there that we are discussing in this menstrual cycle. So, these are the two terminology one has to remember. This is starting, this is end point. So now we need to understand this whole rhythmic behavior, and what we are discussing is a cycle that is ranging from approximately day 0, we can simply say day 0 to day 28 or 29 actually. This may vary depend upon the physiological status of a female body. These are highly regulated by the hormonal balance and hormonal secretion in the female reproductive system as well as in the central nervous system. Now, what we are discussing is this period, and this period is called menstrual period, right. So, this is called menstrual cycle because these are days. And let us try to understand this whole cycle in context of, first we will try to see how the follicles are developing. So, in day 0 we have this development of follicle kind of beginning, and then we have this matured follicle at the somewhere at the middle, actually we can simply say day 14. So, on day 14 we have this mature follicle coming into picture, and what we know that this mature follicle is called Graafian follicle. So, we can simply say Graafian follicle, and this Graafian follicle is getting ova out, and this is the stage what we call ovulation. So, in ovulation ova is coming out in the female reproductive tract, and this Graafian follicle is converted into a structure which we call corpus luteum that will secrete progesterone in order to sustain this ova. Now, suppose if there is a fertilization. So, sperm is coming into the female reproductive system. We will discuss this part again in the fertilization, and if there is a fertilization and if the sperm is penetrating the ova, and then there will be a formation of zygote, and this zygote will develop into a baby eventually. Now, this corpus luteum will secrete that hormone to sustain this growing fetus at the time of birth, till the time of birth actually. So, from here till that birth stage we have this corpus luteum sustained in case of female reproductive system in order to support the growing zygote as such. Now, if this is the condition when there is a penetration of sperm inside the female reproductive system, if there is no sperm available in the female reproductive system, this ova will go till the age till the day 28 or 29, and then the whole ova, the lining of the endometrium and everything is coming out in the form of blood, and what is called as menstrual cycle is simply this period. So, this blood is called menstruation. Actually, the blood which is coming out right from after this stage, if the ova is not fertilized, is called menstruation. So, this blood is coming along with the lining of the endometrial, which is the inner covering of the inner lining of the uterus, ova, this follicle, degraded follicle and everything is flushing out from the female reproductive tract, and that is what we call menstruation. So, this is simply is the follicular phase. Can we call this one as a follicular phase or simply follicular stage, and this we can simply call luteal phase because these are highlighted by corpus luteum. So, this is what we have stages of the female reproductive tract in terms of follicles, developing follicles. Let us try to understand it in the terms of the hormonal level. As we discussed that the follicular phase is under the control follicular stimulating hormone. So, if we draw a line of follicle stimulating hormone that is coming from pituitary. So, level of pituitary hormone is kind of getting high in case of hair. So, we can simply call that the follicle stimulating hormone is quite high concentration here, while the concentration of FSH is getting down at the time of ovulation, and then that is kind of sustaining again, because this is very important hormone in female reproductive tract. So, FSH level is kind of maintaining high at the time of follicular development, while we have another hormone called luteinizing hormone that is also coming from pituitary. So, we have luteinizing hormone, and this hormone is getting upregulated at the time of ovulation, because this can increase the motility inside the ovum and then will help to rupture the Graafian, matured Graafian follicle to release the ova. That is why this LH level is quite high, and this LH level, high level of LH is basically important in order to do ovulation, and this can sustain the Graafian follicle to convert into a corpus luteum, and corpus luteum is what we have the progesterone. So, of course, we have this cycle which we will discuss that later on. Now, in terms of hormonal level, we know that after this corpus luteum phase, we have very high secretion of a hormone called progesterone. So, progesterone is a hormone that is in a very high concentration at the time of luteal phase, because the concentration is kind of governed by the formation of corpus luteum. So, this is complete tract and this hormonal balance. One is in the female reproductive system, the other is coming from the pituitary, which is nothing but the controller for the central nervous system. Now, as such we understood this whole process in terms of what is there in follicle and what is there in the hormone level. Let us try to understand what is happening in the female reproductive tract as such and what we are seeing out from outside. So, what we said that if there is no as such ova fertilized, the ova, the endometrial layer and the corpus luteum and everything will come in the blood as such and will start coming out from the female reproductive system, which is vagina. So, here what will happen, there will be a 2 to 3 days actually, and this again varies actually. This is not a hallmark rule, but it may vary depend upon the physiological status and the age, particularly the reproductive health of a female. Now, this bleeding is actually flushing time to remove all the unwanted stuff from the female reproductive tract. So, this is what is called bleeding stage. And then since the female reproductive tract is now washed out, all the content, the remaining content that was generated during the last cycle, then there will be a recovery stage. Now, the endometrial layer will start the regenerative stage. So, then we will get a regeneration of the female reproductive system. So, there will be a regeneration of the endometrial length, endometrial layer and everything, and then the whole endometrial layer will form itself again, and then this female reproductive system will count. So, these things are going parallelly. So, there will be a development of follicle here started, because once the one that was not utilized in the last cycle is getting flushed out by bleeding, the other one has to develop in order to sustain the next cycle. So, the next one is growing from here, and once there is an ovulation, this endometrial layer is fully prepared to sustain the ova again. So, this ova, if it again the same process, if it is fertilized, the whole endometrial layer will support the growing fetus. So, this is about the endometrial layer. So, again in the middle of this follicular kind of transition. So, middle is very important. So, from 0 to 14 there is an ovulation, and then from 0 to 3 days there will be a bleeding phase where there will be a flushing out phenomena, and then there will be a luteal phase when the corpus luteum will sustain the growing embryo and also by secreting progesterone. So, this is all about menstrual cycle and the phases in the menstrual cycle. So, one has to understand this whole cycle in context of three things. One, how the endometrial layer is getting matured and developed during this 0 to 28 or 29 days period. Second, how this hormone coming from the central nervous system, that is FSH and LH, is controlling the regulatory aspect in this female reproductive system. And third one, and lastly, how this progesterone is coming into picture, that is sustaining the growing ova or growing fetus in the female reproductive system by this corpus luteum. So, these three things are very important in order to understand this menstrual cycle in case of female. So, what we discussed is in the primates, that is the order that cover human beings, apes, New World monkeys and Old World monkeys, while in case of non-human primates what we discussed about the Estrus cycle, that is comprising the species like cattle, buffaloes, cows, dogs, mice, rats, guinea pig and other species of animal which are vertebrates, but they are called non-human primates. Now, after understanding this whole menstrual cycle, let us try to understand a process called fertilization. So, fertilization as such is defined by penetration of male gamete, that is sperm, into the female reproductive system by ultimately getting fused with the female gamete, that is ova. So, this is nothing but the fusion of female gamete, that is ova, mixed with sperm. So, this is mixture of the process of mixing ova with sperm is what we call fertilization, and that is orchestrated by a series of events in case of female reproductive system. So, if we try to recall back our biology of the female reproductive system, so what is happening, this sperm, say for example, this is a sperm, this sperm is getting penetrated by a process called insemination. So, this sperm is getting entered inside the female reproductive system, traveling through the cervix to the uterus, and there in the uterus in a specific area called ampulla, we have this ova lying there. So, here we have this ova, this is nucleus of ova, the outer covering is called vitelline membrane, and after vitelline membrane we have this specific covering called zona pellucida, and after zona pellucida we have this very specific cells that is lining the zona pellucida called corona radiata. Corona radiata. This corona radiata is controlling the outer area. So, it is not allowing anything from the foreign to enter inside this vitelline area. So, this is vitelline membrane, and this zona pellucida is the outer covering of this vitelline membrane, and then followed by a corona radiata. And after this corona radiata, the very outer lining of this ova is nothing but cumulus oophorus cell. What is happening? The sperm is coming in this area after traveling through the female reproductive tract, what we discussed in from the cervix, then crossing the uterine area and coming to the ampullary region in the female reproductive tract. What we have discussed in the anatomical model, anatomical feature of the sperm, in the cap region, in the top neck region, we have a very specific area called acrosome, and acrosome is nothing but the modification of Golgi apparatus. These acrosomes are responsible for secreting various kind of hydrolytic enzymes, and these hydrolytic enzymes, because we are calling hydrolytic, this is called lysis. Lysis means rupturing, lysis. So, it will cause lysis of this cell and then penetrating this whole area. So, this sperm needs to travel this whole area from cumulus oophorus, corona radiata, zona pellucida, touching the vitelline membrane and then rupturing this vitelline membrane to cross this cytoplasmic area of ovum. So, this whole process is kind of orchestrated by this acrosomal penetration. So, acrosome is very important aspect in this sperm. So, this whole process of going and mixing with this female gamete is what we call fertilization. And what is happening, this the whole ova is there. Once this is getting entered inside the cytoplasmic content of the ova, there will be a formation of second polar body. So, second polar body will form. So, second polar body formation, and this second polar body formation is nothing but the completion of meiosis II. After this, the meiotic division is over. So, now this is haploid in nature. So, what we have is XX chromosome in case of female. So, one X is coming in this second polar body and the other X is here. Now, this sperm is having either they have X or Y, because we know that in case of male we have 22 pairs of autosome and the last pair is either XY or XX. So, XY define the male and XX define the female. But then since we know in spermatogenesis that we are getting a single gamete, so the chromosome number is half. So, either we will get X kind of a sperm or we will get Y kind of a sperm. So, if X will go and fertilize X, we will get XX. If Y will go and fertilize X, we will get XY. So, it is the male who is defining the sex of the growing child in future. So, because female is contributing only XX, what is contributed by a male is either X or Y. So, this will define the future sex of an individual. So, if there is an X type of gamete coming from the male side, there will be a female development in the female uterus. If it is Y, it is coming as a male. So, what we have discussed, the sex of the child is defined at a very stage here where the sperm is getting fertilized into the nucleus of ova. So, this is what is the complete phase of fertilization. So, basically the male counterpart is the one who is defining the sex of an individual. So, meiotic phase 2 division is getting completed after the entry of a sperm, not before that. So, we need to remember this point, that entry of a sperm is defining the second meiotic division. Till that the division is in the primary stage. So, there will be a cessation of the secondary second polar body formation till the entry of a sperm. Once there will be entry of a sperm, there will be a formation of second polar body. At that time the chromosome number is getting half. So, this is all about fertilization. In the next class, we will discuss about the developmental stages, how the zygote is getting sustained, how the zygote is getting developed and kind of attaching itself to the inner side of the uterus. And what we discussed, the inner side is called endometrium in the form of a rod like structure, or what we call simply an anchor like area, and that will what we will discuss later on as a placenta, which we will discuss in the next class.